Spring games galore, plus transfer news and notes from across the country after the sticker. Hello and welcome to episode 39 of Good Morning College Football. I'm Nicholas Ian Allen of CFB Winning Edge and CampusToCanton.com. Thank you for joining us on this Monday morning, and it certainly does feel like a Monday morning around here. Hopefully your week is off to a good start, but before we dig into a long list of spring games, so many this weekend that we are not going to be able to touch on all of them today. We will certainly have plenty remaining for Wednesday and probably some that we may not get to until Friday. But some transfer news, of course. But first and foremost, if you are joining us live, thank you very much. We, of course, also would appreciate anyone who will subscribe to the Campus to Canton YouTube channel. Give this video a like. That helps us a ton, and we really, really appreciate it. And of course, we very much appreciate our members at CampusToCanton.com, where you can join for as little as $2.99 per month, get access to a wide range of content written. We've got tools, we've got all sorts of great stuff, including Discord access, where you can interact with other members as well as contributors at C2C, and the founders are very involved there as well. So please do check us out there for as little as $2.99 per month, or you can go all the way up to our All 22 and C2C Winning Edge tiers, where you get access to everything we have to offer. That includes a lot of the work that I do day to day, including our returning production database, which is available for the 2024 season. We've got team pages for all 134 FBS teams that show where players are going, whether they're coming back from the 2023 roster or not, and why. If they are not, are they out of eligibility? Are they transferring out? And if so, where are they transferring? We try our very best to keep track of all of that. Of course, this time of the year with the transfer portal open, it's tough to keep that fully 100% updated, but we do our best and make updates several times daily. And of course, we'll make the most impactful moves as soon as we hear about them, and try to catch all the lower tier moves, by the end of the day, usually within 24 hours. That returning production database is fully updated and ready for the next wave of news. So on that note, before we really dig into the spring games, let's talk a few transfer moves, big moves from over the weekend. One that really stuck out to me was wide receiver Elijah Badger opting to enter the transfer portal. Had been missing a little time in spring practice at Arizona State, and that ASU wide receiver group actually seems like a pretty deep unit all told. But Badger, certainly the best of the Arizona State wide receivers. Moving on to an opportunity perhaps where he'll be in line to, one, I'm sure, win a few more games, because even though I'm fairly optimistic we'll see a step forward for Arizona State this year, quarterback play was a concern with Jayden moving on via the transfer portal as well last week. I know there's a lot of buzz about Sam Leavitt, and we'll talk about that a little bit later in the week. But Badger moving on, I expect he'll be highly sought after. There's one team in particular that we'll touch on today that is in desperate need of some depth at the wide receiver position. Not sure if Badger will end up there or not, but expect that he will be one of the more highly sought after players in the transfer portal very, very soon, if not already. At running back, one note that came out after we finished recording on Friday last week, Ja'Cory Croxy-Merritt, the running back who we talked a little bit about on Friday, talked about Arizona and how they were hosting Damian Martinez, the Oregon State transfer. And Croxy-Merritt, not long after Martinez was on campus there in Tucson, flipped his commitment from Arizona to Ole Miss. So Arizona pretty deep at the running back position already. Quali Conley seemingly in line for a pretty heavy workload there, but Martinez now seems like more of a need perhaps than he was when he, than it looked at first when he was visiting there late last week. Ole Miss, we've talked about plenty as being in the market for a running back transfer this year with, of course, Quinshon Judkins transferring to Ohio State. They brought in Logan Diggs from LSU, but he is not expected to be healthy by the start of the season. Henry Parrish had been a name who'd been mentioned often since he announced that he was going to enter the portal from Miami earlier this spring. But Croxy Merritt seemingly going to end up in Oxford, and you would expect play a pretty big role there for the Rebels. It was interesting. Did see some reports over the weekend that Croxy Merritt actually was on hand at the New Mexico spring game in Albuquerque, where Croxy Merritt had scored 18 touchdowns for the Lobos last year. So not sure that that's going to impact where he ends up now that he is officially committed to Ole Miss. Colorado has done some work in the transfer portal as usual, but two potentially major impact players on the defensive line. Ryan Buell, who perhaps a fairly unknown player to the average college football fan, but an interior defensive lineman transfer from Ohio, where he had a highly productive year last season as an interior defensive lineman. He is transferring to Colorado, as is Deion Hayes, who we talked about a little bit last week, who made headlines for his comments about why he decided to leave Pitt. Didn't think that Pitt was in position to win enough. So, perhaps a little bit of a head scratcher to some who are still fairly pessimistic about Colorado's chances to improve significantly upon their win total from last year, going 4-8. But two potential starters, certainly guys who you will expect will play a lot in Boulder. Buell was a top 10 available transfer last week, according to 247 Sports. Hayes was, I believe, top 20 on most of those lists, 247 Sports and On3, among others. So highly, highly impactful players potentially. And Hayes specifically grades out really, really well in our CFB Winning Edge individual player ratings or video game ratings. He is at a 99 plus in his individual rating, coming off a really stellar season last year for Pitt. At Oklahoma, who did have a spring game, but is not on our current list of teams to discuss today. But maybe the biggest news beyond Jackson Arnold having a great day and getting perhaps a future star standout at wide receiver, the Purdue transfer Deion Burks had an excellent day for Oklahoma, but maybe addressing perhaps the biggest need for the Sooners at this point, bringing in Branson Hickman, the SMU transfer offensive lineman, could be the starting center at Oklahoma this year, especially given some injury concerns for the Sooners this spring. A couple of defensive players that have new homes. Philip Bliddy of Indiana had been highly sought after. A lot of SEC teams in particular were interested in him. He ends up at Auburn, according to his Twitter account, has committed to the Tigers late on the weekend. And then Greedy Vance, who's played a lot in the secondary, most recently at Florida State. He is transferred to USC, a team that we will talk a little bit about today. And that Trojans defense, I mean, on one hand, are they much better? Are they really improved as a unit? Or as is the age-old question in spring games, spring practice in general, was the USC defense good because the USC offense perhaps taking a big step back, especially at the quarterback position with Caleb Williams moving on to the NFL. But with that in mind, let's turn our attention to those spring games, and we'll start with the defending national champions who had a nationally televised, just network television on Fox spring game. A lot of great sites cover Michigan. Among those that I used their write-ups Trevor Woods of Maize and Brew. The Wolverine had 3 separate riders: Anthony Broom, Chris Ballas, Clayton Safey. But there are plenty of great sites out there as well doing excellent work. But I liked Woods' sort of very quick hitter feedback or thoughts on the 4 quarterbacks who played in the spring game for Michigan. Alex Orji was the starter for the blue team. Davis Warren, the starter for the maize team. Orji most expect to be the starter. Perhaps, if not Orji, early in the spring, a lot of the discussion was, if not Orji, will it be Jack Tuttle, who did not play in the spring game on Saturday. But Davis Warren was perhaps the standout. Had 2 touchdowns, 6 for 9 passing, 136 yards, led these 4 quarterbacks with both of those numbers. But Orji was 13 of 18 for 103 yards, also rushed for 19 yards, including an 18-yard scramble for a touchdown. Jayden Denegal was 2 of 6 for 39 yards, was intercepted. Jayden Davis, the freshman, was 2 for 4 for 20 yards. Orji, of course, very athletic, showed his speed with that touchdown run, did have some, good short passes, but also had some somewhat ugly misses at times, threw a couple of inaccurate balls that missed by a wide margin. Denegal had his interception, according as Woods described it, was a bad one. Scrambling to his right, throwing on the run, he threw it right to a waiting DJ Waller. Jayden Davis showed good movement in the pocket. Of course, didn't play very much, but according again to Woods, perhaps displayed the highest ceiling of any of these 4 Michigan quarterbacks. And then Warren, as described by Woods and others put it similarly, had by far the best day as the only quarterback with passing touchdowns, threw a nice deep ball to Kendrick Bell and also hit Frederick Moore on the money for another score. Tuttle, again, working through some injuries, did not participate. Donovan Edwards looked explosive in a small sample size, 5 carries for 33 yards. Good speed, of course. Edwards, the breakaway, now legendary for his performance in the playoffs the last couple of years, but looks like he's in line for an excellent year. Looks bigger, according to reports, has added some weight and some muscle. And of course, one thing that we will talk about, mentioned it or alluded to it, I guess, talking about Elijah Badger. Would Michigan perhaps be a destination? That's purely, speculative on my part. Have not seen any reports to indicate that, but there are a lot of mentions about how Michigan is really, really lacking depth at the wide receiver positions. There were some quotes from Michigan wide receivers talking about how in practice their legs go just because they are taking so many reps right now with just an overall lack of numbers. But according to these reports, there were 5 scholarship wide receivers on the roster: Peyton O'Leary, Tyler Morris, Frederick Moore, Samaj Morgan, and Kendrick Bell. It sounds like Kyle Ford, the former USC and UCLA transfer, is perhaps being considered, and maybe Michigan will bring in the former 5-star who has not been hasn't produced very much on the field in his college career, but certainly could add some a body to that room because they need it, but also a guy who is talented and perhaps could regain some of that potential that he showed as a high schooler and somebody that both UCLA and USC wanted at different times. But some interesting quotes from Kirk Campbell, the new offensive coordinator at UCLA, who said, talking about areas of strength, quote, "We've got really good running backs, a really good offensive line. The name on the back of the nameplates will change. The Zenters, the Keegans, the Barnards won't be around. They were staples around here, but we've got really good players coming back, guys that are chomping at the bit for opportunity." I've worried a little bit, just sort of the way we calculate things at CFP Winning Edge and our roster strength ratings, our team strength ratings. Offensive line is difficult to sort of account for, whether or not there will be a significant drop off from one year to the next, especially when there's a young offensive line that, obviously they're young enough that they just haven't played very much, an inexperienced unit. Michigan falls in that category. The Wolverines recruit very well, but there are limited opportunities for offensive linemen to add to their individual player ratings the way we calculate it. And so there's going to be a drop off at Michigan. That's a big reason why Michigan was, finished the season, obviously, as our number one team in our power rankings, and now are, 12th, 13th, something along those lines. And the drop off at offensive line, quarterback being the biggest, but the offensive line drop off is part of that. But at least according to Campbell, and I don't disagree personally. Again, as we try to mention anytime we talk about our power rankings, my opinion has nothing to do with it. It's how it shakes out on paper using a variety of numbers that go into that calculation. But Michigan has a proven track record on the offensive line. So I don't doubt it. Perhaps that's one area where maybe we are underrating Michigan just a little bit, but also, the wide receiver group is talented, looks good on paper, but unproven. Campbell here continuing and giving thoughts on the quarterbacks. Quote, what I saw from Davis today is what I see from Davis in every practice. Nothing rattles him. He's been through a lot in his life, in his career. That's how Davis plays, practice every day. He's got a great arm, and you guys saw on display today. I'm very proud of him and his efforts. Because he was able to shine in the big house on 2 big throws, and he puts in the work like anyone else. For him to get that opportunity is great. Switching gears here, he says, quote, I think Alex has been a much better passer. Not to Davis Warren, but comparing, I think, to perhaps last year. He had a couple today he'd probably like back, but you can see he can throw the football. Davis's knowledge of the system is through the dang roof. He's like me out there. Jayden Denegal had a really bad start to spring, but he was exceptional in the last 11 practices. I know today meant a lot to him. And then Jayden Davis was like a sponge out there. You tell him one thing and he goes and does. Everybody got better, which is what you want to see out of spring ball. Nobody got worse. So we've touched on this quarterback battle a few times. There have been some folks out there, including some of those that we mentioned writing at the Wolverine and Mason Brew, among others, who speculate that maybe the Michigan starting quarterback isn't currently on the roster. That was earlier in the spring. I think perhaps now that we are getting toward May, not that time is running out, but I think every day that passes without a big name player entering the transfer portal and Michigan getting involved, it seems less and less likely that is going to be the case. So will it be Orji? Will Tuttle have an opportunity to come back and win this job? Or has Davis Warren, really proven that he's going to be a factor in this? Regardless, as Campbell said, the offensive line should be a strength. Donovan Edwards certainly should be a strength. The wide receiver room, needs some depth to be added there, but it sounds like that is going to happen sooner rather than later. Regardless, Michigan is a team that we do expect a little bit of a drop-off this year. Not, the transition from Jim Harbaugh to Sherrone Moore, not a big deal. That is a factor a little bit in our calculations just because Moore, is an inexperienced head coach, and Harbaugh rated as one of the better ones in our head coach ratings. But the bigger factor is just the overall loss of production, replacing quarterback J.J. McCarthy, who we're going to hear his name announced really early in the draft later this week, I am sure. All right, moving on. Texas had its spring game, and at Michigan, it's who's going to be the starting quarterback, because maybe we're not sure, somebody's ready to go out and grab that spot. At Texas, the quarterback is such a strength. It looks like multiple Longhorns quarterbacks could lead this team, into the SEC in its first season there, to contend for the SEC title, to make it back to the college football playoff, maybe to compete for a national championship. That is not hyperbolic in my opinion. Quinn Ewers is entrenched as the starter, did not play very much on Saturday. When he did, wasn't super impressive, did have a pick six while Alfred Collins snagged a batted pass from Ewers, ran it back for a touchdown early in the game. But coming here with some reports and some analysis from Zach Dimmitt of Longhorns Country and Ian Boyd of Inside Texas. Of course, like Michigan, a ton of great sites covering the Longhorns. But the player who stole the show was Arch Manning. You probably saw plenty about this, but the redshirt freshman completed 19 of 25 passes for 355 yards and 3 touchdowns, 2 of which were 75-yarders. And Ian Boyd, who does great work on X's and O's and things like that, I think gives a really well-rounded. It does not offer much fluff generally, even when it comes to Texas. But says that Manning, quote, is ready to lead the Longhorns now. Not expecting that he will supplant Quinn Ewers for the starting job, but if something happens to Ewers, which it has, the last couple of years, Manning coming in, you would expect is going to be able to lead this offense very, very well. Seems like he has grown a lot in his first full season, first full year on campus, really has developed at times out of the spotlight as much as someone like Arch Manning can be out of the spotlight. But he wasn't the only quarterback who excelled. True freshman Trey Owens was 14 of 21 passing for 228 yards, averaged nearly 11 yards per pass attempt, also had 3 touchdowns, had several throws that were just on point. Ryan Wingo was a standout performer. He connected with Owens during the spring game. Wingo had 2 touchdown catches. He was one of 4 top Texas wide receivers who had a touchdown reception. Isaiah Bond, led the Longhorns with 102 yards. He had a score. DeAndre Moore, 93 yards and a touchdown coming from Manning. Thatcher Milton had a touchdown, 83 yards. Wingo, as I said, 81 yards and 2 touchdowns. Jonte Cook had 61 yards on the day. So that Texas offense really seemed to be clicking regardless of who the quarterback was. And actually maybe wasn't as much when Ewers was in the game, but those 2 quarterbacks, Manning and Owens, put on a shows a really, really bright future for Texas once Ewers moves on, as you would expect after this season. At USC, Antonio Morales of The Athletic had some interesting things to say where the USC defense actually won the spring game. Started with a 24-0 lead, ended up winning 43-28, forced 5 turnovers, including 4 interceptions. Morales said otherwise it was a pretty boring day, but a lot of the discussion coming out of the spring game was, hey, is this secondary better? Is this USC defense better? That, of course, has been what has held the Trojans back in recent years. It's what's held Lincoln Riley coached teams back in recent years. But bringing in D'Anton Lynn from UCLA, who had a 1-year turnaround for the Bruins, that was spectacular. They graded out as one of our top performing defenses as far as our defensive team performance numbers go. Could Lynn do the same for USC? Brought in a couple of UCLA starters in the secondary, a couple of other transfers as well. As we said, added Greedy Vance to the mix after the spring game. But again, as it always is with a spring game, with a spring practice in general, it's a zero-sum. Was the defense really that great? Was the offense struggling without Caleb Williams? Miller Moss and Jayden Maiava and other USC quarterbacks did combine to throw for nearly 400 yards. So, a good bit of movement through the air for the passing attack. But, Moss was intercepted. Maiava was intercepted. And so still looks like Moss is expected to be the starter. Wasn't named the starter officially, but Lincoln Riley was quoted afterwards, said, we're in a position right now where we don't have to decide a starter, but if we played today, it would certainly be Miller. Obviously, that's no surprise with the number of snaps he's had in the system. So all those guys are going to continue to evolve as we grade spring, go through summer, and get into fall camp. Guys aren't going to be the same players as they were right now today. As that happens, we'll certainly lean in on the right guy, and we've got several guys in the room we feel like can do it. Riley, this according to Morales in the piece, said the coaches will go back and evaluate the whole spring. He said Moss's first two practices weren't up to his standard, but that he was, quote, lights out the rest of the way. Riley said Maiava started well, but had a bit of a lull during the middle portion of spring before finishing strong. And the head coach wasn't too concerned about the 4 interceptions, at least, right after. Sometimes things can change once they get a look at the video, but said didn't believe that they were chalked up to bad decisions, mainly a lack of execution. So as USC moves into the Big Ten, which will provide its own challenges, finding the right quarterback is going to be key for this USC team, who right now looks like a top 20 team in our preseason power ratings, has top 25 talent, both on offense and defense. Guys like Zachariah Branch, Jacoby Lane sounds like had a really, really good spring. Deuce Robinson, who'll be back from playing baseball. The rushing attack you expect will be decent. Woody Marks coming in from Mississippi State as the likely starter, but Quentin Joyner, Amarion Peterson back as well as highly rated players coming out of high school. Do think that this USC offense is going to be solid. The question for me, if we do see a little bit of a step back from what was a top 5 offense last season, going up against some tougher Big Ten defenses, playing perhaps, in some weather that's a little worse, especially late in the year, that, it'd be understandable that this offense maybe isn't a top 5 unit, maybe it's a top 25 unit, maybe a top 40 type unit. If, that would be a big drop off for a Lincoln Riley coached offense, but I don't think it's out of the realm of possibility. But the big key will be, can this defense take a significant step forward? USC ranked 108th last year in our defensive team performance numbers, 107th against the pass, 127th against the run. Can this be an FBS average defense? If so, USC is going to be a tough team to beat. But definitely a lot yet to determine whether or not this defense really is capable of that. On Saturday, it looked kind of like they were. But again, you never know. It is spring practice. At Texas A&M, Carter Carrolls of Gig'em 247 had a nice write-up of the spring game where he highlighted Purdue transfer Nick Scorton as a dominant performer. His Maroon team, which did win 24-10. Scorton had 5 tackles, which led the team, 3.5 tackles for loss, 2.5 sacks, 2 additional quarterback hurries, and a pass breakup. Not surprising to Mike Elko, the head coach, who said, quote, he led the Big Ten in sacks last year. That does not happen by accident. He's played a lot of football. He knows how to go about his business. He has a really strong repertoire of pass rush moves. I think he, continuing the discussion here from Elko, talking about the defensive line as a whole, I think we have the best defensive end combo that we've had here in a long time. Talking about Scorton and Shamar Stewart as those 2 likely starting defensive ends. Then you start talking about some of the other pieces and what Cassius Howell brings to the table. Howell, a transfer from Bowling Green. What Rylan Kennedy brings to the table. What Malik Cilia will bring to the table. You have a lot of talent at that position right now. That Maroon defense as a whole surrendered just 1 play of 15 yards or more, according to Carrolls. That came on the very first throw of the day from Connor Wigman to receiver Cyrus Allen for a 29-yarder. And from that point forward, It was basically just a dominant performance from the defense. Wegman and quarterbacks Jalen Henderson, Marcel Reed, and walk-on Blake Bost combined to throw for just 242 yards and 2 touchdowns, completed 24 of 44 pass attempts. According to Carroll's, Wegman seemed to be set up for an underwhelming performance with that white team. Arguably his three best receivers, Moose Muhammad III, Jade Walker, and Noah Thomas, were all on the other team, the Maroon team, as well as some of the best offensive linemen, including left tackle Trey Zune III, also only one scholarship tight end. So throw that into the mix, as well as Wegman not, being fully 100% this spring health-wise. Seems that he just maybe wasn't set up to perform particularly well, and the numbers indicate that. Wegman completed 5 of 14 passes for 47 yards. Henderson was 8 of 13 for 100 yards and a touchdown. Reed, 10 of 14 for 84 yards and a touchdown. Also had 4 carries for 34 yards. As the running game went for the Aggies, Le'Veon Moss had 13 carries for 69 yards and a touchdown. Also had a 25-yard reception. Reuben Owens II had just 4 carries, but went for 77 yards and a touchdown. That was a 61-yarder in the fourth quarter. Amari Daniels and E.J. Smith were limited. Those two had a combined 5 carries for 15 yards. Elko said that Daniels has been dealing with a shoulder injury this spring, and that Smith has also had a bit of a nagging injury that he has been working through. And nearly a dozen total contributors for who are expected to be contributors for Texas A&M on both sides of the ball combined did not play. Thought it was interesting that Carroll's noted at the end of his piece the Aggies had 78 players on scholarship on the spring roster. I assume that's the online spring roster, officially, the team website, and just 72 were available for the spring game. So Texas A&M, which has been incredibly busy in the transfer portal, especially on the defensive side of the ball, Scorton being maybe the key incoming transfer for Mike Elko in his first year as head coach. Perhaps plenty of room still to add to the roster this spring. All right, a few more spring game takeaways. At South Carolina, David Cloninger of the Post and Courier, Chris Clark of Gamecock Central were among those who noted that quarterback Lenoris Sellers, who is expected to be the starter, had we talked a lot about it early in our first few episodes of Good Morning College Football, that Sellers was taking that first snap of spring practice. Seems like he has lost no ground on having that inside track to the starting job. Sellers was excellent, had a first drive that he completed all 4 passes for 38 yards, ran twice for 27 yards, also had the first touchdown of the day with a 13-yard run through the left side of the defense after a play broke down. Sellers, after the game, quoted as saying, "I think I did pretty good. We moved the ball, we scored, kept the ball safe. That's the most important thing." Sellers was also in charge for a 2-minute drill at the end of the second quarter that led to a field goal attempt after a drop of a potential big play to tight end Josh Simon. Sellers was 9 of 11 for 70 yards, did not have a passing touchdown or an interception, did have a rushing score, as we mentioned, in 38 yards on the ground. Head coach Shane Beamer afterwards said, quote, "I thought Lenoris was really, really good. He's been good all spring. We thought he looked very poised out there, very efficient running the game. The defensive guys were yelling at me. They thought a lot of those runs would have been sacked if I had blown the whistle." Simply put, he showed why everyone is so high on his abilities. This, according to Cloninger, truly everything you look for in a quarterback: size, dual threat ability, IQ, and calm in the face of pressure. Clark said, one of his questions coming into the spring game was whether or not Sellers would show he had separated from the other quarterbacks, and said, quote, "I believe he did show that." Robbie Ashford, the backup, seemingly at South Carolina, the transfer coming in from Auburn last year. Not much as far as passing stats go, completed just one pass for 14 yards, but did look good running the offense. DJ Braswell got most of the work at running back, but a lot of that was because Rocket Sanders was out, as was Juju McDowell. A pretty long list of players missed the spring game on defense. Maiava, one of the biggest names there. They did have a potential injury in warmups. Marquis Anderson was expected to start for his team on the offensive line. He had a back issue pop up during warm-ups that ended up holding him out. But Braswell looked good, it said, according to, I believe that was Clark, but also Larry Scott, Oscar Attaway, and Jawarn Howell. Attaway and Howell, incoming transfers like Sanders, each chipped in as well. The offensive line, according to these write-ups, perhaps did not necessarily impress, but the defensive line really should be a strength of the team. So again, it's one of those situations. How good is it? How bad is it? Hard to tell when you're going against your own team, but the defensive line looked pretty good. And the wide receiver, one note that was made that perhaps South Carolina will look to add some size in the wide receiver room. Of course, Nick Harbor, big wideout, did not play in the spring, did attend, but has been concentrating on track and field this spring. At Mississippi State, the big standout performance was quarterback Blake Shapen. His stat line is pretty spectacular: 18 of 22 for 312 yards and 3 touchdowns. Shapen worked very well with UTEP transfer Kelly Akiari and Louisville transfer Kevin Coleman. Shapen, of course, a transfer from Baylor himself. So that trio coming together in Starkville, off to a great start for Jeff Lebby, which took a lot of big play shots down the field. Akiari was on the receiving end of 5 passes for 86 yards and a touchdown. Coleman made several big plays over the middle. Freshman Mario Craver looked good and ended up, I believe, leading all receivers with yards during the day. Backup Chris Parson also performed pretty well, 7 of 13 passing for 124 yards and 2 touchdowns. That included a 65-yarder to Craver, who finished the day with 96 yards and that touchdown with his 5 catches. The tight ends were also heavily involved. Seydou Traore, who, of course, was highly, highly productive early in his career in Arkansas State, had a situation where he transferred to Colorado last spring, then transferred to Mississippi State, was not eligible. So perhaps he's a little bit of a forgotten guy as far as college fantasy football goes. But Traore and Justin Ball combined for 6 catches, 109 yards, and 2 touchdowns. Ball actually caught both of those scores. And the transfer-heavy offensive line, which could start maybe 4 first-year transfers, did well to pave the way for the rushing attack. Johnny Daniels led with 6 carries for 64 yards. Jeffrey Pittman had 58 yards on 10 carries and a touchdown. Kevon Lee also had a touchdown and 30 yards on his 7 carries. And Damian Martinez was on campus in Starkville this weekend. So we'll probably find out where Martinez is going to be headed by the end of the week, we would expect. But will it be Starkville? We shall see. Regardless, sounds like the Bulldogs will have a pretty exciting offense this year. How good is the defense, or how bad is the defense? That we may not know yet, but expecting high tempo, a lot of deep shots. And Jeff Lebby has a pretty strong track record as far as putting up a lot of points, a lot of yards as an offensive play caller. At Florida State, there was less that I wanted to discuss about the spring game itself, but more, there was a pretty interesting piece from Brendan Sonnone of Knowles 247, who gave some superlatives for Florida State this spring, and did think it was interesting. Sonnone's top performer was Azaria Thomas, the standout in the secondary, who showed playmaking ability, consistency, and leadership. The fastest player was Jalen Lucas, who is someone every spring, practice write-up seemingly included, a big play from Jalen Lucas, who has been a running back, also played a little bit of receiver, or was very much involved in the receiving game at Indiana prior to his career. But Lucas is, probably going to be a little bit of a gadget player, maybe moving around quite a bit, but he's seemingly making so many plays in practice that he's going to be a factor in the offense one way or the other. And sounds like is, the fastest player maybe on the roster. The best hands, according to Sonnone, was Malik Benson, where, maybe the biggest news out of the spring game was that Benson was carted off with an apparent lower leg injury, maybe an ankle, something like that. We'll, of course, be on the lookout for some details there, but hopefully that is not going to be something that'll impact Benson's availability this fall, because, again, much like every write-up that we had from a wide variety of sources at FSU spring practice, where Lucas was making plays, Benson was the standout wide receiver far more often than not. But Lucas is not the only running back who's been impressing. Sonnone said that Mr. Dependable is Lawrence Toafili, the top freshman from spring practice, Cam Davis, who there's been a lot of buzz about, the top transfer, Roydell Williams. So Williams, the transfer from Alabama, a lot of people expected would be in line for that number one spot at running back for Florida State, and he may be, but it sounds like, the biggest top area of strength, according to Sonnone, is running back, the running back position. That's a unit where maybe a lot of guys are going to contribute, and a lot of guys are going to have an opportunity to impact the game. Unfortunately, the most significant injury, according to Sonnone, was Destin Hill. I think we talked about Hill's injury a couple of weeks ago, but I didn't realize perhaps the extent of it. According to Sonnone, a knee injury early in camp after some strong moments in the first few days has his availability, I should say, for the season in question. So hopefully, and I haven't seen confirmation, maybe I missed something. Haven't seen if that's, ligament damage or something like that. Hopefully it's not, but seems like maybe that was a little bit more likely the case than I had maybe initially gleaned from those early spring reports. All right, few quick takeaways here before we dig into our team of the day, which will be Marshall. We've got plenty to save for the rest of the week, but do want to talk Iowa State, Louisville here at the end. At Louisville, which had their spring game on Friday, Derek DeBurger of the Louisville Cardinal and Matthew McGavick of Louisville Report were on hand, among others. Tyler Shuck, of course, is going to be maybe the player that most want to see, expected to be the starting quarterback. He had a 76-yard touchdown to Chris Bell on the first drive of the game, also led a second touchdown drive later on where he again connected with Bell. Shuck played every other drive, according to DeBurger, and was the most effective when he saw the field among the quarterbacks. DeBurger said possesses a visibly strong arm, good mobility, although designed quarterback runs will likely be few and far between this season. Of note, Shuck has dealt with a lot of injuries, including some that happened when he was running the football. Seems like Pierce Clarkson is not only was he the first quarterback off the bench behind Shuck, but seems like he played well enough maybe to put himself firmly in that number 2 quarterback role. So should something happen to Shuck, it sounds like Clarkson maybe is going to be the next man up. Shuck was 8 of 12 for 177 yards and 2 touchdowns. He had an interception. Clarkson had a 60-yard touchdown on his first drive, went over the top of the secondary, though he wasn't pinpoint accurate with all his passes, according to DeVerger. Made good decisions, played smart. It's just one scrimmage, but Clarkson looks like the clear backup as of now. Bell was the undisputed star of the spring, according to these reports. The 2 touchdowns with Shuck being, certainly a big part of that, but was very much in midseason form, it sounds like. The rest of the receivers were a little bit underwhelming. Ja'Cory Brooks, the transfer from Alabama, did not play due to injury. Hopefully he will be back and is expected to likely start alongside probably Bell, maybe as the third. Colin Lacey, the transfer from South Alabama. A lot of folks are really high on him and his potential at Louisville there. But Brooks was out. Jimmy Callaway was also out. Offensive lineman Renato Brown and several others were unavailable as well. At Iowa, John Stepp of the Gazette and Rob Howe of Inside the Hawkeyes made note of a few things. Iowa, of course, was impacted by injury. Cade McNamara was not available. Did take some reps in individual drills as he continues to recover from knee surgery. But the quarterbacks, again, outside of McNamara, looked pretty shaky. Deacon Hill took the first team reps during the 11-on-11 period. He threw 2 interceptions and was close to a third. Marco Lainez, who took some first team reps this spring, mostly taken second team reps, did show some good athletic ability to extend plays, but mixed results throwing. Expected top running back LaShawn Williams was out. 2 starting offensive linemen, most likely, were out. A starting receiver and perhaps one of the top 2 tight ends, also unavailable. The defense had its own key players missing, but other than lack of success throwing the football, perhaps the biggest takeaway with the new offense were the amount of shifts and motions that Tim Lester has implemented. Sounds like, according to Lester, there's most of the offense was installed this spring. I forget the number, like 80%, something like that. But expecting Iowa to be perhaps very involved pre-snap, according to Stepp. He said, whether it be speedy receiver Caden Wetchen, a member of Iowa's arsenal of tight ends, or someone else, motions, sometimes pre-snap and sometimes during the snap, were a near constant during Saturday's practice. So giving opponents something to worry about pre-snap, getting those guys in motion, moving around, a little bit more difficult perhaps to defend moving forward if that's going to be carried over into the fall. At Iowa State, final takeaway for today, and we'll save a lot of ACC and Big Ten notes for Wednesday. Payne Blazevich of Cyclone Alert and Tommy Birch of the Des Moines Register both noted that running back Dylan Lee, true freshman, was the standout for Iowa State on Saturday, showed fluidity and speed at the second level, according to Blazevich, continued to produce from an overall strong spring. Lee is an early enrollee, led the team with 80 rushing yards during Saturday's spring practice finale, the spring game there. He had a 17-yard touchdown with a quick cutback behind the line of scrimmage. There were some injuries into the running back room, and starting tailback Abu Sama was limited on Saturday, which allowed Lee to get a large number of the reps, but he seemingly impressed with that. A couple of quotes from starting quarterback Rocco Becht. Quote, he's good at that, talking about the bouncing out and cutting back. He has good vision, so he's able to see where he's bouncing out, and he has the acceleration to get to the outside. I'm comfortable with him anywhere, Beck said, and I'm excited to see where we're able to put him. So Sama is likely still going to get number one running back carries, but Lee certainly could be a factor as a true freshman, and sounds like maybe if we're trying to read between the lines of what Beck said, maybe he will be used in a variety of ways, maybe not as just a traditional backup running back. So something to keep in mind as we look forward to the fall. But on Friday, I mean, we've already got a pretty packed sheet here. Notes from Stanford, Michigan State, Illinois, Syracuse, Wake Forest, Oregon State, Memphis, Tulane, more from Arizona State. We still haven't even really, dug into Boston College, which we'll have a chance this week because I expect we'll get to talk some ACC power rankings by the end of the week, hopefully. But today, let's finish with Marshall as our team of the day. And I've had this note in the show sheet since April 6th, I believe, was when the staff of Metro News had a write-up with a few quotes from the Marshall coaching staff talking about the change in offense. So a few things here. Most critical this spring is the installation of a new offensive system, the air raid, under new offensive coordinator Seth Deggy. Emphasizes short, well-timed pass plays while working to stretch the field vertically. So if you've been thinking about Marshall, especially from a CFF standpoint, as having produced a pretty good string of highly productive running backs, and Rasheen Ali last year, likely to be drafted a little bit later this week. Seems like he's putting a good draft buzz. Of course, had a very, very good career when healthy. But maybe that's not going to be the expectation, or maybe shouldn't be the expectation moving forward, because there is a new offense in I almost said Morgantown. That's not right. Huntington. The head coach there, Huff, said, the Herd are doing a good job picking up the new offensive scheme as well as tweaks to the defense from second-year coordinator Jason Samore. But, quote, part of it is to see when you get the pads who can block and get off blocks. We've got more talent on the roster now, but we've got to find a way to hone that talent. We're still trying to get better with the execution. In the air raid offense, it's not as much about the featured back, but it's about the guy who can handle the pass protection, the routes, and the run game. Typically, in the air raid offense, the runs you get are a little more spacious, so you can take advantage of that a little bit more. So fast forward a few weeks, the spring game was on Saturday. Chuck Landon of the Herald Dispatch had a column afterward where he talked about quarterback Cole Pennington, who entered the spring as, perhaps the number one quarterback. And it sounds like after spring, nothing really has changed despite Marshall bringing in, I believe, two quarterbacks. Braylon Baxton, the transfer from Tulsa, seemed like he was the number one challenger to Pennington this spring. Mitch Griffiths, a transfer from Wake Forest, as far as I can tell, is still committed to Marshall, but really didn't see much about him this spring. Griffiths would be the most experienced quarterback in the mix for Marshall, so maybe he's coming this summer. Maybe I missed something, but dug into his Twitter account and it lists Marshall in it. Has some retweets from Marshall sites and things like that. So I may have to find out a little bit more, but Griffiths threw for 1,539 yards, 9 touchdowns, and 8 interceptions at Wake Forest last year. Pennington had 695 yards, 0 touchdowns, 6 interceptions, averaged just 6.2 yards per attempt. So, not sparkling numbers there for Pennington, who, of course, the Marshall legacy. And Braxton had his own struggles at Tulsa. Completed just 44% of his passes for 212 yards, 2 touchdowns, and he also had 6 interceptions. Braxton is a threat to run the football, had 174 yards on the ground and 40 carries. Griffiths, not a statue, ended up with 128 yards on the positive side, but that was on over 100 carries, including sacks. Pennington was by far the worst as far as his rushing production. Had negative 69 yards on 15 attempts. Vast majority of those are going to be sacks. I believe was sacked 10 times, if my numbers are correct there. So anyway, getting back to the piece from Landon. He said, when Marshall started a spring session, Cole Bannington was the number one quarterback. 4 weeks later, the redshirt sophomore was still the starting quarterback in the spring game Saturday. Obviously, it's Pennington's job to lose, and he showed why during the scrimmage. Completed 12 of 19 passes for 134 yards, 1 touchdown, and 1 interception. In the first half, Pennington was 5 for 5 for 53 yards and the touchdown. Huff quoted here, this is completely opposite of what we were doing last season, talking about the change in offense. We're going to start stringing some consistency together. The rest of the quarterbacks who were on display this spring or in the spring game seemingly did well, except Braxton, the Tulsa transfer, who was just 1 of 6 passing for 5 yards. So again, Mitch Griffiths wasn't in the write-up that I saw. And again, maybe I missed something. But other than Cole Pennington, the standout statistically was Colin Parachek. Who appeared in just 1 game, attempted 1 pass. It was intercepted last year. But based on just, how the stats shook out and how some of the quotes looked from what I was able to gather from the Marshall spring game, if not Pennington, if not Braxton, Parachek may be in the mix. But again, Griffiths perhaps a little bit of a wild card there. And maybe somebody out there knows more than I do. Would certainly love to find out. But how's the rest shake out? Well, Rasheen Ali, of course, is moving on. He had 1,140 yards last year and 15 touchdowns. That leaves Ethan Payne as the most experienced player returning from last year's running back group. He had 83 carries for 335 yards and 1 touchdown. But Jordan Houston, the transfer from NC State, where he had 96 yards on 25 carries in just 3 games last season. He is going to be in the mix there as well. AJ Turner and Antoine Roberts also back for Marshall. They had very limited touches combined for just 8 carries last year, 31 yards combined. The receiving core, where they're going to be getting a lot more work, even with Jayden Harrison having transferred out to Notre Dame, Caleb Coombs transferred out, Elijah Metcalf and Carl Chester are expected to come in as transfers and be impact players. Metcalf had 54 catches for 634 yards and 6 touchdowns last year. Chester, a big play performer, 22 catches, 401 yards, 1 touchdown. DeMarcus Harris is the leading returning receiver for Marshall from last year's group, had 24 catches, 396 yards and 1 touchdown. Chuck Montgomery, similar numbers for receptions, had 20 catches, just 269 yards, but did have 3 receiving touchdowns. Christian Fitzpatrick, also a transfer coming in. He had 17 catches, 240 yards, and a touchdown. And at tight end, Cade Conley led Marshall last season, and he returns, had 23 catches, 215 yards, and 1 touchdown. Justin Holmes, a transfer coming in at tight end, had 20 catches as well, 188 yards, and 0 touchdowns. On the offensive line, 2 full-time starters are out of eligibility. One is transferring out. That leaves Logan Osborne as the lone double-digit starter, but 2 other returners started at least 4 games last season, and Bryce Ramsey coming in as a transfer. He was a double-digit starter last season. Should help add some experience and continuity to that group. A couple of other transfers, Jeremy Jones and Cedric Nicely, might factor in as well. And the Marshall defense is, has been a strength for Marshall in the past. Ranks pretty low in our returning production numbers. So, mentioned all the turnover there on the offensive side of the ball, but Marshall's still at least just in double digits as far as our ranking go and our adjusted offensive returning production. They're 97th, but losing starting quarterback Cam Fancher, who transferred to FAU, losing Ali and all that production, in the rushing attack, losing your leading receiver, Harrison, multiple starters on the offensive line. That's still, not as bad as it could be on the offensive side of the ball. Defense, a little bit worse. 114th with just 45.6% of last year's defensive production returning. Adjusted in those numbers, there are a couple of players coming in, didn't play a whole lot, so not much different from just the raw numbers, which Marshall ranks 99th with 45.4% returning from last season. They do lose a couple of key transfers. Deani Hill, I believe, is going to be taking a visit to Miami pretty soon. He was a starter in the secondary. Elijah Alston has of course, moved on and will be a Power 4 likely impact player after having nearly 40 pressures last year and double-digit tackles for loss, 5.5 sacks. He's going to be a big loss, as is leading tackler Ellie Neal, as is Owen Porter, who himself a highly, highly disruptive pass rusher for Marshall the last couple of years. But J.J. Roberts, Stephen Dix Jr., A.J. McGee are all returning. They rank 2nd, 4th, and 6th among the tacklers last season. So 3 of the top 6 are back for Marshall. But overall, pretty inexperienced unit. Marshall ranks 105th in our overall adjusted returning production numbers. And it's going to be a tough start to the season. In week 1, Marshall does host Stony Brook, so they'll be big favorites there. The FCS opponent should get a big win, but then 2 road trips in 3 weeks. They do get a week off in between trips to Blacksburg to face Virginia Tech, who is on the extreme positive end in returning production, and then Ohio State, who we've talked about plenty the last couple of weeks, is our preseason number 1 in our current power rankings. So Marshall probably going to be, a decent underdog against Virginia Tech, and then heavy underdog you would expect, even with an extra week to prepare for that trip to Columbus. They finish non-conference play by hosting Western Michigan, and then get into Sun Belt play, where it's going to be tough. They do play probably your Sun Belt favorite in the Sun Belt opener, hosting Appalachian State, but still tough matchup there on the first Saturday in October. Then take a trip to Georgia Southern, host Georgia State, have a week off, host ULM, so a good cross-division matchup there. Trip to Southern Miss, a team that, as we've discussed, going through some things, pretty key season for head coach Will Hall. And then the Sun Belt East finales there, the last 3 weeks, hosting Coastal Carolina, at Old Dominion, and then at James Madison. Pretty tough final 3 weeks, but I'm a little more concerned. How do things shake out those first couple of non-conference games against FBS opponents, the trip to Virginia Tech, the trip to Ohio State? How will Marshall make it through there? Will the quarterback situation have figured itself out? Will this new offense have shown, some positive signs, or is, there going to be a chance where those two defenses, who I think Ohio State is going to be maybe the best defense in the country, Virginia Tech is probably going to be one of the best defenses in the ACC, with as much as they're returning, with Brent Pry, calling the shots there defensively. That could be a real hit to confidence for the quarterback position, for the offense, the change as a whole, maybe the confidence in the play caller, the confidence in the new offense. Will Charles Huff be, maybe lose patience early on in the season if things don't go well, if things look particularly bad? And will Marshall be able, assuming they lose both of those games, and potentially expect they'll get blown out by Ohio State? No offense intended. I just think, Ohio State is one of the best teams in college football this season. Is Marshall going to be able to recover, in time to get back, beat Western Michigan, probably draw the 2-2 in non-conference play, and then host App State, who could be the top team in the Sun Belt this year? Will they be able to, put a good performance there, or will things start off on the wrong foot in conference play and again be difficult to recover? That middle stretch at Georgia Southern, against Georgia State, ULM, and at Southern Miss, there are enough potential wins there that Marshall could lock up, bowl eligibility before that, late November stretch against teams that I do expect will be competitive in the Sun Belt East. But this Marshall team, could go either way. If they get off to a rough start in those two key non-conference games, things potentially could spiral. But if they, perhaps perform a little bit better than expected, and this new offense really does click, if it's Pennington who takes over at quarterback, if all the transfers come in at wide receiver and perform well, then this Marshall team could very much be a dangerous team, as they often have been in the Sun Belt East. So one of those teams, a lot of them that we've discussed as our team of the day, could go either direction. Marshall, I think, very much, has a wide range of potential outcomes. Could be, one of those highly competitive teams to beat in the East, that sort of jockeying position, likely behind App State, or, depending on what James Madison looks like with its high level of turnover. But again, there are some concerns that with an inexperienced roster, new play caller, new offense, questions at quarterback, there's the potential there for things to really go the wrong direction as well. So maybe this is a Marshall team that we're talking about. Man, they really disappointed, finished 4-8, and Huff is out. That I think is a possibility also. So we'll find out, of course, before too long, how Marshall will get off to a start in 2024, as we're right around, I think, 130 days until week 1. So we're making progress as we look ahead, as these spring practices finish up. We get into the summer, and then fall will be here before you know it. So that's going to wrap it up for us today. Thank you for joining us. This has been episode 39 of Good Morning College Football. Thank you to those of you who joined us live. Thank you to those of you who have liked and subscribed liked the video and subscribed on the Campus to Canton YouTube channel. And of course, thank you to our Campus to Canton members, whether you're joining us at walk-on or scholarship level, or whether you are an All-22 or C2C Winning Edge member, which of course gets you access to those returning production numbers and team sheets for all 134 teams. And then early May, probably that second week in May, is when we will be publishing our 2024 team profile. So you'll be able to see, a team like Marshall, how they project week to week, projected point spreads, preseason win totals, projected depth charts, all that good stuff. Will be available to our C2C Winning Edge and all 22 tier members. We're shooting for May 8th now. That's our target date. Still not officially official. Could be May 10th, but it'll be that second week in May for sure. So we'll have more details for you on that as well as we get a little closer. But we will be back on Wednesday for episode 40 of Good Morning College Football. Hope everyone has a wonderful Monday, and we will see you then.